Yeah, folks, this is the Sunday after Easter. You know, we've had our Christmas, we've had multi-services, pageants, all kinds of parties, family engagements, all of these things. And now the year is closing today. In just a few hours, we'll be into 2018, and we'll flip a switch on and go back to work on Tuesday. It's been an interesting week. For those of you that had it off, I'm sure you got to see a lot of people and relaxed. For those of us that were working, I don't think we all worked that hard. We ate a lot. I know that at my office there was constant food. But here we are this morning under very cold conditions. And I want to thank all of you for coming out and being here, because you know that there is more to Christmas than just coming once a year. This Christmas spirit we talk about doesn't just last one day. And that's what I'd like to talk about a little bit this morning. Last Sunday night. How can I forget that? Christmas Eve. Those number of us were here and heard Martin talk about coming out of the trenches after Ed Jelinek did a beautiful job on singing that ballad, Christmas Eve in the Trenches. It was a song that was written back in the 80s based on a real life incident that happened during the first Christmas of the First World War. This was a war, as you know from history, that included just about every European country there was. This was the beginning of losing the dynasty of the kings and the queens that had ruled Europe for so many years. The war was caused by a domino effect because of treaties and intermarriages. And when the Archduke Ferdinand was assassinated in what is now Bosnia, it triggered a number of events which led to this Christmas Eve in the trenches. And Martin talked about us as a congregation, us as a faith community, coming out of those trenches that we may build up around us and do our work here among the people in this congregation and in the wider world. Well, this morning I'd like to look at this a little bit. I want to take a little bit different avenue. And I need to, first of all, share a story with you. And it's a modern day story that took place in a hospital several years ago. And we see a man in a bed, an older man in a bed, being treated for a disease, an illness that there was no cure to, and he was going to die very soon. And into the room came a young man in his 20s. And the nurse saw him and led him by the hand over to the bed, and she spoke into the patient's ear and said, "Sir, your son is here." And this young man held this man's hand, sat down, and for the rest of the afternoon and evening and night, he held this man's hand and murmured words of encouragement. Early in the morning, just as dawn was breaking, the man died. And the nurse came in to cut off the equipment, and she said, "I want to offer condolences to you as his son." And the man looked at her and said, "This isn't my father. I've never seen this man before. What's his name?" And she came to find out that this man was walking down the hall, and he looked into this room, and he saw this man there, and there was no son to hold his hand. So he went over and held his hand until he died, because no one should die alone. You know, what this tells us is in what the scriptures that Christine just read so beautifully. The greatest commandment, the commandment of love thy neighbor, that is the essence of what our faith is about. You know, I heard that story, and I thought about last Christmas Eve and how these two things come together in different parts of the world and in different circumstances. Here they were in the trenches. These were young men. They were usually far from home, and one of them was a farm boy from the southwest coast, I believe, of England. And they had been fighting all day, and there was going to be a Christmas truce after dark. Darkness came, and the guns stopped, and after a little while, this young man started to sing a familiar hymn, or not a hymn, but a carol. And when he finished it, he heard a voice across from the other trenches. "Hey, English, sing another." And he did. And then this voice and this young English soldier decided that they'd get out of the trenches and meet halfway and sang another carol. And they did. And then their compatriots from both sides came out of the trenches. It's never been done before, and I don't think it's ever been done since. But these young men were tired. They were probably hungry. It was cold. And they came out and had fellowship with their counterparts. They drank coffee, shared food, what they had, played a soccer game. And then when the truce was over, they went back in to their trenches and started fighting again. Well, my question here is, why did they do it in the first place? Were they tired? Were they hungry? Or was there something else? And then why did they go back and start again? Why didn't they just say, heck, I'm not going to do this anymore, and throw down their guns and walk away, or stay and socialize? Both sides. And then you talk about this young man that held this man's hand. Why did he do it? What provoked him to do that? Interesting questions. Well, to begin with, we're talking about change. And change is hard, as we all know. And we've been through a lot of changes this past year. Some of them good, some of them not so good. Some of them we agreed with, some we didn't. And also, as we look at the scripture reading, they're Pharisees. They were a sect of the Jewish faith that dates back to the 2nd century BC. And they believed in free will and sovereignty, and neither one would cancel the other out. They believed in the Torah and the sacredness of it. And they believed in there would be life after death. And they also placed great emphasis on clerical thoughts rather than theological thoughts. And they were questioning Jesus. And this was the time of the week that he came to Jerusalem, and at the end of the week, as we know, he was crucified. And they were challenging him because Jesus was coming forward with a new thought. He was coming among the people, and he was preaching and talking about compassion. And this is something that they hadn't seen before. So they were nervous, and they were trying to trap him. And Jesus, a lot of times, if you look at scriptures, you know, somebody will ask him, challenge him, and he'll turn it around and ask them a question so that they can reflect and get the right answer, hopefully. This time he didn't, not at least according to the scriptures we read. He immediately said, love God with all your soul, with all that you have, and to love thy neighbor. So all of these have something to do with each other. Now, I throw in Christmas spirit into the pot. If this was a recipe and we were stirring a pot of food or something. We have Christmas spirit on Christmas, but unfortunately we lose it by the time of the new year, usually. And I'm not saying each of us do, because basically looking out over this audience this morning, I'm preaching to the choir. But there are those of us that always don't think about loving thy neighbor or taking care of each other. But come the week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks before Christmas, we all of a sudden, how many times have you heard somebody say, well, I finally got Christmas spirit? Well, what is Christmas spirit? Is it something that we do for one day a year and then forget about it? What about getting a call on the 10th of July saying, you know, we've got a project that we need done. Can you help? Or can you come to LifeBridge and help feed a meal? Or go visit a sick person? Or help your neighbor build a deck? Well, sometimes we do and sometimes we don't. Sometimes we've got conflicts and schedules. We all know that. But so often we do forget that Christmas spirit. I know I have, and I'm sure all of us have. But the saving grace to all of this is our God forgives us. He forgives us every time, and that's the good news, because we get another chance to do our thing. But if we look at the young man again, the young soldier, they were carrying out God's will and that Christmas spirit, that spirit of loving and kindness. And they were doing it not at Christmas. Well, in the trenches they did. But the other fellow, I don't know what time of year it was. It could have been any time. But he saw a man there that needed for his hand to be held. That's the greatest gift anybody can give. We talk about all our material gifts that we give at Christmas. But the greatest gift that comes out of Christmas is the ability to love one another. How many times have all of us celebrated a Christmas where we've been able to touch somebody or they've touched us? We can't put a monetary value on it, but it's something that is incredibly good. I'll tell you one short story. It's about me. I'm 4 years old, living in Stanton, Virginia. I wanted one thing for Christmas, and that was an electric train. I had lived for this thing. I even went to see Santa Claus with a catalog so I could point out to him what I wanted. Well, if my mother and father saw that I was being, well, a little not having much Christmas spirit in their mind. And my parents were youth advisors at our local Methodist church. And that year they decided to support a family in need. Well, on a cold Saturday morning, not as cold as what's out there now, but pretty cold for Western Virginia, I went with the group, and we went to a house. It was a little bit run down on the outside, but when we opened the door, there was a dirt floor. There was no modern conveniences. They had a well out back. You know, they didn't have a stove, so they cooked over an open fireplace. And I don't remember how many children there were, probably at least 3 or 4, and a mother and a father. And they were so thankful. We brought turkeys, a couple of turkeys, a couple of hams, assorted other food, clothing, gifts, particular toys for the kids. Until this day, that has been the best Christmas story that I've ever heard. And I'm being a little cocky here, I guess, but it was. It gave me the greatest gift I've ever gotten. And to be with those people and to share their love and their kindness with me. A little obnoxious 4-year-old that all he wanted was an electric train. Well, for those of you that know me, I still collect trains. But I think I've learned how to give more than to receive since then. And so that's what we have here today. We have a continuance of this wonderful Christmas spirit that we've all got now. And I pray that you'll be able to keep it and think about it. And think about those young lads in the trenches. Think about that young man holding the older man's hand. And know that God loves us, and he expects us to love us with everything that we have, and to love our neighbor. Not in a passionate love, but in a universal love called agape. So I ask that you remember this on this cold, cold, sunny Sunday morning. Amen.